I had been talking with my long-term collaborators at Hospital Records about painting a wall in their office for a few years now. Their recent move to a new office in East London finally made it seem like the right time, so I went through the archives and mocked up a few ideas using some old illustrations. We all agreed on a design based on this illustration that we used on some packing tape, so I took a trip across the city to scope out the project. I measured up the walls, and I transferred the dimensions into the computer, which allowed me to nail down the design a bit better and make sure everything was going to fit properly. I wanted to hand paint this wall, and I made sure to heed what I learned from my experience painting a bookshop window when Alley Cat Rally came out a couple of years ago. This time I wanted to minimise the freehanding of the initial design before jumping into painting, and I figured the easiest way of doing so would be with a projector. No shame in it. Thankfully, they had one in the office that did the job perfectly. So I tested that out on the site visit while I was at it. A few days later, I was ready to paint, so I came back with Frisbee in tow, ready to start. I set the projector up again, and after a couple more tweaks to the design, I was ready to start penciling in the outlines. I had no idea how long the job was going to take, but I was glad that the pencil stage went really quickly, and I was done before lunch. I popped down the road to get a can of paint mixed, and I think I eyeballed a pretty good match, considering they couldn't mix the Pantones at the decorator's shop.
That's a pretty good match.
As this illustration was based on something I designed a few years ago, there was a bit of self-trust that I had to take in remembering what it even was that I was painting. It was all a blend of musical equipment, medical equipment, creativity and old tech, which I guess is how I see Hospital Records. The main thing in the middle I know was a combination of a reel-to-reel tape player and a kidney dialysis machine. I'm not sure how many of the people working for the label these days will recognise a mini-disc player though. Frisbee was a surprisingly patient companion, but she eventually grew tired of napping and decided instead to get in the way of what I was trying to paint.
You're in my way, Frisbee.
Then to get in the way of the staff at the record company. I'm sure she believes she helped sell a few extra records in her own way. The optimism I was afforded by the speed of the pencil layer wore thin, and I started growing tired too. But I managed to get this blue first layer done before the dog and I headed home. Feeling rested and optimistic, I came back the next day to start work on the black layer. I felt glad to have been able to experience my project at Goatyard recently, as it was really helpful to be able to remind myself that if we wanted it all to be pin sharp, we would have had the graphics printed and applied to the wall, and I wouldn't be hand painting it. That allowing it all to be a bit rough and imperfect is what made it unique. A few of the people in the office made comments about my patience doing this, which was interesting because I didn't think about how patient I was being, despite having spent about 10 hours painting the wall at this point. In my own head, it reminded me of a time when I was on holiday as a teenager, and my brother and I challenged each other to swim across a bay. I remember getting halfway and feeling a spot of panic upon realising it was just as far to turn around and swim back as it was to keep going, and having to push through that feeling. So more than anything, I wanted it to be finished, as not finishing it felt like it would be just as hard work. It got to a point in the afternoon where I realised that I probably wasn't going to be able to complete the job without it becoming a terrible rush. And I didn't want to risk making any bigger mistakes than I'd already made. So the dog and I called it a day again and I headed home. It was a few more days before I could come back to finish the job, but I was glad to find I had last left it well over halfway done. So it wasn't a huge slog to get it over the line. It really didn't take very long to do the last few outlines, and that meant I didn't have to rush to put in the last few details. I even remembered to initial and date it, which was good. Then I got the projector back out to nail the details of a couple of logo marks in the design. I also tried for the third time to straighten up one particularly wonky line. And eventually I was really glad to call it finished. It was such a long time coming, but I'm really glad to have done it. Maybe it's a bit self-serving to say so, but I think it's really photogenic. So I'm sure it will be appearing in hospital social media a lot in the coming years, which is awesome. And it's nice to be able to show the world that I can do something like this by actually doing it. It's not like actual back-breaking physical labour, but it was surprisingly hard work to paint this. It took me longer than I expected, but I think it was well worth it, and it's probably one of the best things I've done in a while. Thanks for watching this video.